Why is vengeance such a powerful surge of emotion that most people want to fulfill or satisfy? To achieve this, people turn to violent means to accomplish this. But what does it accomplish? Does it fulfill the people who were lost before the act of vengeance? Or does it only satisfy oneself? When an individual says they will take revenge on someone and for someone, does that fulfillment of the act of vengeance satisfy the people who are lost? Or is it selfish act to satisfy oneself because violent acts or intent is never the answer? To answer this question, we will dissect two characters from the Korean drama Kingdom. One is the Crown Prince Lee Chang, who is the protagonist of the entirety of the show. The other is Ashin, the new character that was hinted at the end of Season 2, and also featured in a special episode of Kingdom called The Ashin of the North. Both of these characters have gone through similar traumatic events and tribulations, from a father that was murdered to being manipulated and deceived. Although similar events have occurred to both characters, what sets these two characters apart is their interpretation of vengeance and how they should act on it. For instance, Lee Chang was on the brink of being killed by the Haewon clan for taking political power by taking advantage of the plague. Ryu, her daughter, who was the soon-to-be queen, and his son, decided to take advantage of Lee Chang's father, the emperor, who was sick and ill, in order to up their political status in the country. They turned his dying father into a zombie and also infected thousands of people in the process. Lee Chang saw this as his responsibility to protect his own people from the plague while also taking back the throne. Similarly, Ashin, a girl from the northern Seongjoyan village, lived in the Joseon soil. She also had a beloved father that had a strong presence in her life. Still, she was manipulated by the Joseon soldiers for their false promises of him obtaining political status despite his absolute loyalty, and the entire village was eventually raided brutally by the Jurchens. Both of them have a clear motive for vengeance, but the intent and the way they are to fulfill the vengeance is entirely different. Lee Chang, from the very beginning, was taught to survive by his father, who taught him from a very young age that he needs to survive no matter what. Also, coming from a place of loyalty and status, he gallops across the country to find the doctor to help explain the potentially horrific disease and its cure. On his way, he saw his own people affected by the lack of leadership and political chaos within the palace, as many starved because of it. As he witnessed the contrasting lifestyles of the elites and the poor under the lack of leadership and protection, Lee Chang was determined to save them by destroying the Haewon clan and reclaiming the throne. His vengeful nature came out of the optimism to fulfill the greater good of his people. The feeling of his own abandonment by the people within the palace made him sympathize and realize the intent of his vengeance, to save the country from political and economic havoc done by corrupt officials. That is not the case for Ashin. Ashin's entire village was slaughtered by the Jurchens and had promised by Joseon soldiers that she will eventually be able to achieve revenge as long as she worked for them. She worked relentlessly while diligently practicing to shoot arrows and spied on the enemy's fortress. She then realized at the end that it was the general of the Joseon soldiers, Chi Rock, who fueled the massacre of her village. Upon the realization of the betrayal on both sides, she burned the Joseon fortress and also turned many of the Joseon soldiers into flesh-eating zombies. Her vengeance was fueled by the ill intent due to the deception and manipulation of both sides. At the end of Ashin's story, we found out that she did not bury her dead villagers, but chained them up and resurrected them into flesh-eating zombies. The psychotic nature of such an act of resurrecting her dead villagers into such grotesque forms shows Ashin's abandoning of any hope and goodness, as her main goal from here on out was to destroy Joseon and the Joseon people. The peak of both of these characters, Lee Chang and Ashin, was their father. Although they have different interpretations of vengeance and what they should fulfill, both of them had a scene that was the same that changed their characters in the process. That is, killing their own father. Lee Chang's father was already turned into a zombie and was forced to defend himself from his father killing him. A memory flashed before his eyes about his father, lecturing and encouraging him when he was young that he had to survive no matter what. After beheading his father, he was determined to head back to Hanyang to take back the throne to save the country. In Ashin's case, she saw her father in one of her missions as she witnessed her father's limbs decapitated and chained. After years of not seeing her father, she wept and tried to free her father. Her father kept repeating, "Kill me." She spent the whole night with her father in her arms, and when her father repeated, "Kill me," for the last time, she stabbed her father while tears slowly escaped from her eyes. The killing of their father in both of these character stories is a symbolism of their vengeful nature. Lee Chang had no choice but to kill his father and knew that his father would want him to do so because of his upbringing to become a great leader. In Ashin's case, she killed her father while her father was conscious because he wanted her to end his suffering. Lee Chang's father came from a perspective of hope, while Ashin's father's dying wish came from a perspective of desperation. When she finally killed her father, she not only killed her father, but killed any hope of finding happiness or returning to her peaceful childhood because her father was her only last hope. In that sense, Lee Chang and Ashin could technically be the same character, but grew up in a different environment that defined their vengeful nature. One was born into royalty, and the other was born into the poorest and underdeveloped part of the country. Therefore, Lee Chang's vengeful nature came from a duty to protect, while Ashin's vengeful nature came from a duty to destroy.